Hey, this is Jon Leon Guerrero, producer and host of Your Break It Down show. Our guest today is Don Lewis. He's an electronic engineer, an accomplished musician and vocalist, and by way of letting those passions commingle, a pioneer in the field of electronic music. I was introduced to him at a party by our dear friend Larry Batiste, who said, "This is Don Lewis. You'll be fascinated by this man. He invented the synthesizer." To which Don replied, "No, Larry, I did not." And we all had a good laugh. Now, while it might be technically true that Don did not invent the synthesizer, its place in popular music and in the modern music production process would definitely not be what it is without his contributions. Don's commitment early on to the interconnection of musical instruments and to the programmability of drum machines led to the proliferation of home studios and to the very existence of EDM and hip-hop. Yes, I said it. He changed a lot about the way we create music, and for that he's also the subject of the documentary The Ballad of Don Lewis, The Untold Story of a Synthesizer Pioneer. It's a fascinating film. You should definitely see it. It's available on demand on all the carriers. I sat down with Don and his wife Julie over breakfast. They've been together through it all, and it was terrific to talk with them both. They're just amazing. I think you're going to love this conversation. Now, real quick Pete and I both want to encourage everyone out there to support your favorite causes. Giving is living, and you should do it. We especially like veteran causes, and we really especially like Save the Brave. Read about them at savethebrave.org and toss them a few bucks if you can. We also want to encourage everyone to exercise, especially while we're all sheltering in place. It's easy to sit still and eat your way through the day. Watch out for yourself. Do some push-ups, jump some rope, get your heart and your lungs working. Be hard to kill. And make sure you check out donlewismusic.com for more info on Don and his work. So here he is. Actually, here they are. I really love these people, and you will too. Here are our guests today, Don and Julie Lewis.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland. This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is Jon Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
This is Don Lewis.
This is Julie Lewis.
And
we're...
what was...
Leaving it in.
Okay.
And we're listening to the Break It Down show.
Okay. No, we're in it.
Yeah, we're in it. So, do you want to try it again? We can try it again, or we can leave it in.
And we're listening to an episode.
And we're listening to the Break It Down show.
Oh, we're listening.
And we're listening to the Break It Down.
We're talking to our listeners, so you're listening to the Break It Down show.
You're listening to the Break It Down show.
Perfect.
Break It Down show.
Yes.
Okay.
Can I write it out?
Okay. I'm Don Lewis.
I'm Julie Lewis.
And we're listening to the Break It Down show. This one right here. This is
okay.
One more time.
Okay. Well, let's go one more time. And you're listening.
And
we're telling the listeners.
And you're listening to an episode.
No, not an episode.
Yeah. Take that prepositional phrase out.
And you're listening
to the Break It Down show.
To the Break It Down show.
You're listening to the Break It Down show.
It's so simple.
Okay. I'm Don Lewis.
I'm Julie Lewis.
And we're listening to the Break It Down show.
Perfect. I am in the lovely home of the Lewises, and we are celebrating a couple of things. We're doing a segment for Roland on the TR 808 and its induction into the Tech Hall of Fame. And we are also just celebrating Don Lewis because there is a documentary that's coming out soon that is many years in the making. 17 years in the making, perhaps?
It's been that long. I'm not that old.
Yeah, and so it's called The Ballad of Don Lewis.
Yeah.
Now I have to insert there because Ned Augustenborg, the filmmaker, wants to make sure everybody knows it's the untold story of a synthesizer pioneer.
Yes, it is that. The untold story of a synthesizer pioneer. However, Don Lewis is a musician through and through. from his soul, he is a musician. Let's not forget that, because his contributions as a synthesizer pioneer have touched all of us who have listened to the radio at any point within the last 40 years. And that's a big thing to say for anybody, but it's the truth. All of the sounds that we now hear and take for granted as being part of the popular music landscape for now going on 3 generations are really find their incubation in your laboratory right here in Pleasanton, California.
I guess you put it, I never thought about it that way, but I guess it has touched. I never even thought that what I was doing was, something that would affect everybody else, but that's what our lives are. You can't do anything in the world and not directly or indirectly affect other people in this world. And to try to inspire has always been my mantra.
That's a funny thing to hear you say, and it really downplays, I think, what our listeners' ear holes have been through for all of popular music. Now, one of the things that you did, and I don't want to give away the whole story of the film because it's a beautiful film. Ned did an amazing job and told the story in a way that was really compelling, and it draws you in and it fascinates. But I'm going to save that story for the film because everybody, you should watch the film. It's called The Ballad of Don Lewis, the untold story of a synthesizer pioneer. And Ned has worked on it for many years. And
yes.
That'll be a whole different episode. But the reason that I have Don and Julie Lewis here with me today, Don was easy to talk into sitting at the table, but I also talked Julie into doing this because your story, Don, is wholly incomplete without Julie's story. And the fact that you were able to endure what the music business and the music technology business has thrown at you and that you've endured and that you've overcome over the last many years has everything to do with the support system that your wife provided.
Amen.
So I will ask you, Julie, how has it been living with a synthesizer pioneer, and how much of that did you realize? Because if he says he didn't realize what he was doing, what did you realize he was doing?
So when I met Don, he was already deep into synthesizers, and he was playing in clubs with all of the components of what became Leo, but they were all separate. He had this dream of putting Leo together, but from the moment I met Don, he was already into synthesizers. Mm-hmm. The reason that we jokingly say he married me is because I was able to put synthesizers in the back of my VW Bug and drive them around.
Awesome. That's terrific. Sometimes circumstance brings us where we need to be. Leo, for our listeners, is a monstrosity that is thankfully encased in plexiglass, so you can see
all the circuitry.
The circuitry that is in there. And Leo is the predecessor to really a music technology that we now completely take for granted called MIDI.
Right.
And it is what allows components to talk to each other and control sounds from other components. And for the music nerds out there, you know how important that is and what that means. For the non-music nerds, it allows creative people who you know and love to do their best work. And what it is, like I said, a monstrosity that is encased in plexiglass right here in the front room of your house.
Yeah.
Now, I'm in a house in Pleasanton, California, in an idyllic neighborhood. It's beautiful here. And you would not expect that the first thing you see when you walk in the front door of a beautifully kept home is this enormous monstrosity of wires and keys and everything else. And it's almost like if you walked into a beautiful house in any beautiful neighborhood in the country and walked in and the first thing you saw was the Wright brothers airplane. That's kind of what it is.
Okay,
Yes.
so the Live Electronic Orchestra, which Leo happens to be an acronym for, I because I have this engineering background, I always thought that all the art that goes into making up these printed circuit cards, the components on top, I mean, to see the infrastructure, it's like looking at a skeleton. Before it's all been encased and kind of wrapped up, and you don't get to see that. But I thought it would be kind of interesting for people to see what they actually were hearing. And so that's how that came about.
And that's why you chose clear plexiglass.
Yes.
And I should let you know that this is very temporary. Leo went into the Museum of Making Music.
I made it sound like you have to step over keyboards
Well, you
to
pretty
walk
much
into
do.
Julie's house.
Yes, you pretty much do. But it went into the Museum of Making Music in 2001. And just last year, we were approached by the museum because they didn't have room to display it in its entirety. So it was being a little bit cannibalized. And we said, well, that's not Leo. And they said, well, okay, we're going to do renovations and redesign the Innovations Gallery. But if we do that, we're going to make Leo the centerpiece. And we need you to
As it
sign.
should be.
And we need you to sign a 10-year contract that you won't remove it for 10 years. And I went, not even for a concert? And they said, no, you can't take it out because it'll be the centerpiece of the gallery.
Yeah.
So we were able to negotiate with them that they would display it in such a way that Don could go down there and play it.
Yes.
Okay.
So
So you're promising to leave it there for all to admire
for 10 years.
on the condition that you can go down there and it's built in a way that you can play it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because I think a piece like this that was the segue from the analog world to the digital world. This piece was Leo was an inspiration for Mr. Kakehashi, who led the team that made the protocol for MIDI, musical instrument digital interface. He said that this was his inspiration to take that idea from the analog into the digital world.
And so he and Dave Smith had an agreement that needed to happen.
Yeah.
So Mr. K had seen it work in a nightclub.
Yeah.
In a nightclub.
In San Francisco.
Yeah.
That was the Hungry Tiger?
The Hungry Tiger.
Wow.
Yes.
In beautiful North Beach, right in Ghirardelli Square.
That's the
was where
cannery.
that was.
It was
Oh, it's a cannery.
Yeah.
I see.
Right next door.
Next door. So that piece of equipment, when you moved it there, how long did it sit there?
Well,
Because you didn't haul that thing in and out of that place in your Volkswagen Bug.
No, we hired movers. But when Don first brought it out from Denver, where he built it, I was living in the Sunset on a second floor of a flat, and I had to find movers that could move it up those stairs, and those old stairs and flats.
Yeah.
And make the curve.
And they had to turn the corner.
Yeah. And
Wow.
and a really funny story. We had it up there, and we decided we needed to do some publicity photos, and we hired a very talented young man named Phil Toy to come in, and he brought all these lights, and he plugged them in, and he lit up the instrument, and it just looked magnificent. We had gels and things going on, and all of a sudden we smelled smoke.
Oh, no.
And we unplugged those lights so fast. But it was, there we were in this flat, and Don would play it, and then the neighbors would bang on the walls.
On the walls, the ceiling. Wow.
So we always had to have professional movers.
yeah.
Yeah, it is a monstrosity. There are pictures that we're going to put on our website, of course, but in gigging with this thing, because that's the challenge. And ultimately, again, you are a musician. So you built this thing not as an architectural marvel. You built this thing to play it and to express with it.
Exactly.
And so the challenge of physically moving it from one place to another required you to get a gig in a place where you could leave it.
Yes.
Exactly.
And thank goodness that's what you found in the Hungry Tiger.
The Hungry Tiger we did.
So during those 5 years, there were times when we would pull it out for perhaps performing in Tahoe.
Okay.
Don played up at Harrah's and at
You had to go to Harrah's in a moving van
Oh yeah.
and
with
also
a Tommy lift. You got beep beep.
it flew a couple of times to Kansas City.
Wow, in a C5 undoubtedly.
We wish.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We had
took
an
a pretty
episode.
big
Oh, boy.
beating. That wasn't the greatest thing, and we had different special events. We'd pull it out for.
And we even played it
during the
down at
5
City
years.
Hall one time.
Yeah, it was down in City Hall once.
City Hall. Yeah.
Okay.
In San Francisco.
It's really the equivalent of moving a cathedral pipe organ. You know,
Without the pipes.
just to let everybody know kind of what the challenge is when we're talking about a musician and his need to move this thing, and then Julie's got a Volkswagen Bug.
Well,
Understand the challenge.
Don came with an open road camper, so
Okay. All right.
and a U-Haul.
Now, at some point in your musical career, though, the Times you were well ahead of the Times, and they had a hard time catching up with you, and you had run afoul of the musicians' union, which, unions are supposed to represent us as workers, and the musicians' union did a terrible job of representing you at the time, and I don't want to give away for the movie, because you should watch this movie. It's The Ballad of Don Lewis, the untold story of a synthesizer pioneer. I'm not going to leave out that tagline ever. There you go, Ned. And it is a fascinating movie. Just a sidebar with our listeners. It's one of those movies where I had gotten it and I was watching it because I'm researching for this interview that I'm conducting. And so I knew I was going to have to go through the film, and I wanted to kind of do it in chunks. You can't do it in chunks. You get sucked into the thing, and then you can't put it down. And I remember I watched it early in the morning. I woke up super early one morning, which is something I do pretty frequently. And, a little bit of watching time, a little bit of reading time. And I watched that thing until it made me late for work. So
Okay.
you can't stop it. So budget the time, everybody. Budget the time. But when you watch the film, it is a compelling story of the Times needing to catch up with with what was happening. Because your whole mission in building Leo was to express, as a musical creator, all of the voices that you heard all at once.
Yeah. This goes back to a time when I was in Dayton, Ohio, as a kid, and my mom.
The land of the funk.
The land of the funk. The land of the funk. And this is a nice segue to that. I grew up in Baptist church, and we had choirs. We had a little youth band, a whole bit. But my mom, when I was probably 4, 5, 6 years old, every Saturday afternoon, she would turn on the radio. It's back in the late 40s, early 50s, and she would listen to the Metropolitan Opera.
Okay.
And so I would hear the libretto being talked about, narrated at the beginning, and then sitting there looking at the radio and thinking that was the stage, and I could hear the orchestra tuning up, and I could hear finally the overture would start, and then all these singers would start singing. And so that was embedded in my mind.
Wow.
Back then, I didn't know that it was that important, but now I look back at it, because that was a landscape.
That was your wiring.
And I didn't have access, or our community really didn't have access, or even have
Where do you see an opera?
Yeah, in Dayton, Ohio.
Right.
And at that time, I know now.
Or go to the symphony hall at all.
Yeah.
Right.
It was very segregated.
Yeah. And so
That world didn't even exist.
no, it didn't. It didn't.
So Don told me that he used to actually stand in front of the radio and conduct.
And conduct.
Yes.
Yes.
So
Yeah, because you could see the playing field.
yeah.
So this is really what this mission of yours was about, was that you were able to see a playing field that for a lot of people they'd never either had access to it in their mind
Yes.
or never thought about what it may take to bring together all those sounds that made.
And so, fortunately, I went to high school, and I don't want to tell too much about the because I want people to
Yeah.
to
Go
see
watch
the
the movie, everybody. It'll still be worth it. We could sit here and probably recite the movie word for word. It'd still be worth watching.
But I love math and science and stuff, and we had a electronics course, which is unheard of back in the day. And I took that course, and that was the beginning of me understanding how we could make sound. We built radios and TV back in
You
the 50s.
built radios and a TV in your electronics course.
Yes. This is back in the 50s.
Again, a sidebar with our listeners. I want to punctuate for anybody out there who's doing something interesting in technology, the importance of sharing that passion for technology that you have and the knowledge of technology that probably gets taken for granted when you're sitting at the kitchen table trying to describe to your family what it is you do for a living, and share it with kids you think might not have access to it.
Yes.
Because you never know who's going to get it.
Yes.
You just never know who's going to get it. And somebody's going to get it and they're going to take it to another place.
Yeah.
Or they're going to take it to their place and spread it around.
Yes. Exactly.
So everybody, if you're not already doing it, do what we always encourage. We do an intro to the show. And in the intro to the show, we always say, hey, help us support these causes. And one of the causes that we support of the various ones. But this is why these things are important.
Yes.
Because there are kids out there whose minds are just waiting to be exposed to the stuff that,
Sponges.
yeah, they're sponges and they
Yeah.
don't get everything in the circumstances where they live. But somehow you got a hold of this electronics course that allowed you to understand a little more about this playing field you were seeing
Yep.
and make sense of it.
Yeah.
And so when you can build a radio or build a TV, then you realize, oh boy, the world is mine now.
Yes, yes. So it's all about also mentors, and my mentor was Sam Ewing, who was the electronics instructor, and Mr. Payne, my mathematics, and William Young, who was my science teacher. All of these people that influenced me in those specific areas. And then there was Clarence Francois, who was the choir director at the Glee Club in my high school, Dunbar High School. So all of these influences, it's like you take the pieces of the puzzle, and then finally this Leo is sort of taking that whole picture of my life and musically and all the influences, and taking that and putting it together to make music.
Yeah. Yeah. And not only putting it together to make music, but putting it together to allow you to create tools that unlock everybody else's creativity.
That's it.
When I met you, I'm going to rewind for a second. I met you at an event that was amazing to me. We
Yes.
had a great time at this thing. It was a celebration of the work of David Porter, who, along with Isaac Hayes, were the chief songwriters at Stax Records.
Yes.
And they wrote all these iconic hits, and he just told stories about them.
Yes.
And we could have listened to those stories all night, but also there were amazing musical performances by
Yes.
some of our friends and loved ones. And I was introduced to you by our very dear friend, Larry Batiste. I don't even know how many times I've said that on this show. I was introduced to you by our dear friend, Larry Batiste, because he introduces everybody. And we can never say enough nice things about Larry and give
Larry
him
is
enough
a
love.
sweetheart.
He just
Yeah.
ran into him the other night.
Yeah, you guys were just together the other night.
Yes.
The occasion, though, was a lot of fun. And in the midst of all that fun, I was reuniting with some friends and meeting a lot of new people. And you were one of the new people I met. And Larry introduced me to you as, you need to know Don Lewis. He invented the synthesizer. Which we know is an oversimplification of the things that you have done.
No.
But He got the point across.
Well, yes, but for your listeners, we need to be clear. Don was a big contributor to the industry, but there was Bob Moog, there was Alan Perlman, there's John Chowning, there's
Dave Smith.
There's so many people.
And Roger Lynn.
There's so many people. You know,
Tom Oberheim.
It's like
Tom
you know,
Oberheim.
it's really just like the story of the synthesizers, like a giant mosaic,
Yeah.
and everybody's got their little stone
Paw
in there
prints in there.
somewhere,
Yeah.
and together it makes a glorious picture.
Right.
That's true. That is absolutely true. And by the way, all of those names that went by, we would love to have you on the show.
How about Mr. Kakehashi?
And you can't Taro Kakahashi, the
How about
founder of
Lawrence
Roland,
Hammond?
yeah. I mean, there were a lot of people, and we can say that the mosaic was really contributed in a number of directions, and they were all absolutely necessary.
Mm-hmm.
But for the case of popular music in the 1980s, which is the generation that I grew up in, and really the turning point for the importance of synthesizers in popular music, which, of course, now there are a lot of people who complain that the guitar is going away. And I don't think it'll ever go away, and I think it'll always have a great place, and it exercises a different part of creativity in terms of the songwriting process, and will always be appreciated. But there are a lot more songs now in popular music that rest on the synthesizer as a creative instrument.
Right.
And the fact that that happened had a lot to do with all of those contributions and all of those little, footprints but meanwhile, here comes Don really kind of riding an elephant in through the thing. It's not even a bull in a china shop. It's an African bull elephant. And the china shop is almost a miniature china shop. And because it wasn't just the technology, because there were guys who were developing the science and the technology. Your understanding of it, though, allowed for the development of the creative palette. And I think that's the important part that we're highlighting today. Have I
think,
captured this correctly?
I think that is a good statement, because that's part of why Mr. Kakehashi so valued Don coming over to look at instruments that were in breadboard shape, and because Don was always looking for a way to make it more musical, and always pushing for more features to give more expression, and sometimes he didn't, they'd talk about it, and Mr. Kakehashi would kind of shake his head because it was maybe too expensive or something like that. But Don was just always in there pushing, I need this, I need this, I need this.
As a musician, you needed that to foster the creativity.
And then Don would pull out a napkin and draw the
diagram. Draw the schematic.
And then Mr.
Here's how we make it work.
Then Mr. K would draw take the pen and
here's the expensive part. Here's what we can't mass produce.
We spend so many hours, just drawing on napkins.
Oh, that's terrific. Yeah. Well, there's a definite place for the person whose job it is to make it scientifically possible to, in your case, create synthesis of sounds. And then there's and this is like the road crew. And the road crew is crucially important to the show.
Yes.
But then there's the artist. And it's almost like your understanding of electronics allowed you to take this piece of work that these teams were developing and then insert the part that gave it a soul. So now, what do you say to that, Don Lewis?
Well, you said it all. There's not much for me to say. But one of the things that I think really, for me, made a difference is that innately I felt as though what synthesizers were about was an evolution of what we are and how we make music and how we perceive music. And the way that, if you look at popularity of the original synthesizer, which is the human voice, the thing that comes from man, not just the other stuff, is the human voice. And the human voice can manipulate. You can speak any language. You can sing any song. You develop that, and
You can mimic sounds.
Yes, you can mimic sounds, and so I liken it to this: the oscillator in a synthesizer is the vocal cords that you have.
Okay.
Okay. The filter on the synthesizer, the VCF, voltage controlled filter, that is your mouth. Mm-hmm. So you go from wow 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 wow. That's the filter going back.
Right.
The movement of your mouth is what we call the envelope generator. It tells your mouth when to open up, when to shut down, and how close to be. Okay, so all of those things are emulating the human voice. If you listen to so that is the beginning. I call that the organic synthesizer.
Uh-huh.
The next generation of synthesizers were the mechanical synthesizers, the violins, the horns, all of those things. Those are mechanics.
Yeah.
That's the mechanics.
But all similar.
All similar. And then you get to the electronic synthesizer and digital. But what makes the difference is the way those instruments are played.
Uh-huh.
If you listen to someone playing a violin, when they really hit your soul is when they're emulating the way we sing. Because singers, that is the most popular record that are ever out, that ever comes. That's the most popular medium.
Right. Yes.
Because people hone into it. They have a voice.
Right. And you can relate to it.
You can relate to that.
It becomes more than a chamber and a thing with aperture and a thing with...
Right. And so when an instrumentalist is playing, where they're playing a keyboard or guitar...
Much as we can love that.
Yes. They're emulating that emotion that comes from that voice.
Right.
They're phrasing so people can... And so that's, to me, that is the power... And understanding that is that those instruments, that technology from the mechanical to electronics to the digital is all emulating, trying to get that same emotion that would come from a human voice.
Hey, this is Pete A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here. And if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it.
Trying to get that same emotion that would come from a human voice.
Yeah.
Pregnant pause for effect. Julie, you have to live with a guy who thinks like this.
No, we went to see the San Francisco Symphony a few times last year, and there were speechless moments afterwards because we realized that we just saw this conversation.
Yes.
And
you're right. That's when it's best.
So inspirational. I mean, it was just emotional. Mm-hmm. It was so emotional because we could hear these conversations coming on from different points and different places, and on all the nuances that were going on. And of course, Don afterwards says, "That's what I want. I want all of those focal points of sound and conversations
to express the conversation.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Yes. The emotions,
it's storytelling.
We're so lucky to have such a phenomenal symphony orchestra,
so close
amazing.
by.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
I forgot my question. But the important part, though, is that you're right. There's an emotional connection that's necessary.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the part this is what encapsulates the contribution of Don Lewis to the musical world is the ability to give the tools of emotion to an artist in a way that 30, 40, 50 years ago, more like 40, 50 years ago, was really unimagined. As an instrumentalist, you could have a viola or whatever it was you played and imagine the expression in that instrument. Mm-hmm. But to give somebody access to all of them You know, there's almost, you have to be curious about whether or not that's the right thing. And now we know it is the right thing because of the creations that we have. But I think it was Alfred Hitchcock who said the worst enemy of cinema is lack of limitation. When really what you did was kick away all the limits.
You know, it's interesting. I think it was around 1983 when a lot of the new digital instruments were starting to appear, correct? Is that correct, Don? Yeah. And Don was still playing this
Leo.
analog Leo in San Francisco in the Hungry Tiger. And I was actually hostessing there so I could pack people in. And
I see. You were fitting as many people as could go in
that's
there.
right, because you can't have two people sitting at a table that'll seat six.
Yeah,
and
no,
a line out
Unacceptable.
the door. You know, so
we're making new friends tonight.
Exactly.
absolutely. But you know, one night, some people came in and they were obviously synthesizer guys, and I heard the one saying to the other, "There are newer instruments that have much better horn sounds and much better string sounds and are much more realistic." He said, "But this thing's got life." And, you know, and I get chills when I think about it because when Don fired it back up, when he brought it home and fired it back up and started playing it again, it was such a nostalgic feeling because it's not perfect. It is so not perfect. It goes out of tune all the time. But
And that's what makes it alive.
Yes.
you know, it constantly has to be tweaked, and you know, Don, I'll play for you later, and you'll see. I mean, it's constant knob turning and stuff, but it's like a marriage. You have to tweak it constantly, right?
Yeah. It's like flying a helicopter in bad weather. You know, you have
better
to
tweak it.
you got to pay attention to everything.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that, though, because you bring up a great point about what made the synthesizer sounds that you developed so revolutionary. And that was their dynamic voice, their ability to sound like a thing that was not just a straight sine wave that was a predictable. Talk about that.
Okay, so in the analog days, which is really my experience, the things, the variables, because the circuits were not that perfect.
Not all that reliable.
Yes, and so it's like working with anything that is sort of organic. It's like the tree out there. I mean, when the wind blows, those branches move, and you almost feel like that with some of these synthesizers. But you want to work with that. You don't want to fight it. You want to work with it, and you have to be open-minded. You can't just think about the 12 notes within our limited, I say limited, Western music scene.
Right.
You start to think about what nature is, and how we are, and how different we are from one another, and then how much the same we are, how much we have in common. And so sitting there playing that, taking various sounds and making them contrast to other sounds, it's like painting. It's like you have a color. In fact, when I was working with Quincy Jones, when we started talking about synthesizers and what kind of tones, sounds he wanted, he would never tell you what kind of. He didn't say a clarinet or something like that. He says, "Make me, give me a silver sound, or give me a kind of a blues sound."
Wow.
Yeah, he would talk in colors, and so you start to look at the texture or the harmonic structure of each one of these sounds. And then sometimes it's not even that precise. Sometimes you just start mixing up stuff and see what comes out. And
There's an emotion in there somewhere.
Yeah, and
Just gonna let it happen.
Yeah, and you say, well, I don't know if I can use that sound now, but maybe later on I can use that sound. And so you start coming up with these ingredients, because when you're working on a project, like if you were doing a studio thing, it's a whole different kind of mentality because you know what you've got a picture or scene or something that you want to complement. But when you're working just with sound only is when you can really stretch.
And that's where the limitation is. So if we've broken down all the walls for creativity, where we find those limits that challenge us is just focusing on the sonic landscape. Because now you have all the tools.
Yes.
What are you going to do in this playing field right here?
Right.
And what colors are you going to create and what textures are you going to create with what you have? Wow, that's terrific.
Yeah, because we have, we used to have, we still have, three basic, maybe four basic sound waves that we work with. The sine wave, which is devoid of any harmonics, and then you got the sawtooth waveform that has all the even harmonics. Then you have the square wave that has the odd harmonics, and then you have the triangle, which has a little bit of both.
And it's the combination of all of that creates a living sound.
Right. And then by taking those and manipulating, and when we got into the other area, the DX7, along with this 80s revolution, the DX7 FM frequency modulation, which was created, so to speak, with John Chowning at Stanford. That came up with, FM radio. That's what I used to think about because we built FM radios when I was in high school.
Yeah.
But I never thought that.
But you understood how it worked.
Yeah, I understood there was a phenomenon, but we never thought about the fact that you could take audio frequency and modulate it with another audio frequency, and that happened because, that's vibrato.
Aha.
A lower frequency. The vibrato is the opposite of what FM radio was. FM radio, the carrier is in a radio frequency, and then the modulator is audio. But when we sing, the audio signal is modulated by the
Right.
And so it's the same phenomena.
So that's what made it magical was the variable.
Yeah.
The vibrato, so to speak.
Yeah. And if you raise the pitch of the modulator,
Quicken the vibrato.
Yeah, quicken the bring it up. Then it creates completely different sound on top of the carrier.
Wow.
So all of this is
Don't you wish our listeners could see Don's face right
yeah.
There's so much expression and so much passion in what you're talking about, and you're talking about these waves making an emotion in us that we don't know we're reacting.
Yeah, and they're creating new textures. In fact, when the DX7 came out, all these sounds that we were trying to do with subtractive synthesis with the analog were things that were more perfect and more easily accomplished than it was with subtractive synthesis. John blew my mind in '72 when I met him.
And I want to punctuate that point because universities often perpetuate their existence with their endowments. And one of the things that feeds a university's endowments is their properties, whether they're physical properties or intellectual properties. And the single most profitable intellectual property at Stanford was that. Exactly. So that's substantial.
Yeah, I'm amazed at the path that I've traveled and not really thinking that I'm going that way, and running into people like Takahashi, John Chowning, all of these, icons for generating music.
Yeah, because you were just having fun.
Yeah, I was having fun, but I understood what they were doing was more than just, I won't say more than the music that I was producing, but there was something, the basics of what they were doing was something I understood. And and I gravitated to it. I became a big proponent of it.
Let's come back to that.
Okay.
Julie, what made you fall in love with this guy?
Oh. What's not to love, right?
Didn't expect that question, huh?
No, but well, I think you're sitting here observing what's lovable about this guy.
Yeah.
He's very enthusiastic. He's he asked me when we first started dating, would you like me if I wasn't a musician? And I said, well,
Of course not.
I don't know what you'd be if you weren't a musician.
That's the great answer to that question. What on earth would you be? And wow, that makes sense of a lot of a lot of our relationships, I'm sure.
But yeah, Don's easy to fall in love with because he's enthusiastic and he's fun, and people used to ask me all the time after they'd watch him do a show, they'd say, first they'd say, I wish I loved what I did as much as he loves what he does.
That's the first and most obvious thing. Yeah.
Okay, and then the second question was always, is he like that at home all the time?
Uh-huh.
I'd say, no, actually he's kind of reclusive at home, but he's when he's around people, he opens up.
Somewhere that whole process has to incubate.
Yeah.
And that's what has to happen at home so that all that expression can come out when the people are paying attention.
Absolutely.
But it is an interesting thing that Don's passion for it. First of all, your ability to understand what you want out of the creation process, and then your ability to exercise toward it. Also fun to watch. And then the passionate approach and the understanding of the meaning of it to people, even when people don't understand the meaning of it to themselves. That's a lot of fun too. So I guess I asked you that question because Don is still absolutely obviously into it, and you are still absolutely obviously into him being into it.
Well, I think I'm into it too. Yeah, and it's not just him.
By now.
Yeah.
You kind of have to be by now.
Well,
it's in your living room.
Well, for the people don't. Just to paint a picture, when you walked in, there's not only Leo, there's also two other organs here.
Right.
Full-size organs.
And you don't even notice
pedals.
them because Leo is the monstrosity. It would be like if Frankenstein's monster was in the middle of your living room in his 8-foot self. And then, by the way, there's also something else going on in the corner. It's but there's a big green Frankenstein monster sitting here.
But at any rate, I told Don I'm going to get a sign made that says organ donor room.
Okay.
So,
this is the donor room for all the organs. Okay.
but,
That's fair.
Yeah. But, it's been I think that being in this world created something very different for me from what I had been doing because I had been a pediatric nurse for several years.
I see.
A lot of years. And
that's a fun thing to be.
Yes and no. I mean, I loved
sure
that. I loved that profession. I loved kids. I worked in university hospitals, UCLA and UCSF, but where you see tough things.
Yeah.
It was a great career. But when Don came along, I discovered I had a knack for something I didn't know I had, and that was a little bit of marketing.
Probably didn't even know it was there.
Marketing and promoting, and it just sort of naturally gelled for me. So. Well,
I will also tell our listeners that in the development of this interview, we talked about meeting. Don and I met, being introduced by Larry, and then that was followed by me meaning to call Don for a couple of months and just not picking up the phone until finally I realized that we were doing this piece for Roland on the 808 and that Don had influenced the development of that machine, and it made me go, hey, I've really been meaning to call Don Lewis. I really should call him. So then I called, and following the voicemail that I left, you called me back and we talked for about 20 minutes or so. And it was a fun conversation and mind-blowing for me. You probably don't even remember it. But after that, Julie kind of took over and said, okay, here's what's going on. Here are all the things you need to know. Here's all the stuff you need to digest. And then when you come over here...
then you have something to talk about.
Yeah, well, not only have something to talk about, but do you like coffee or tea?
You're right.
I mean, all the way down to every detail. So
Yeah.
it's one of those situations where I really pulled you up to the table, Julie, because I wanted to make sure that everybody understood that much of this creative process was made possible by you as an enabler. You know, the fact that Don has not to worry about a bunch of the things and know that there are things that are getting taken care of that foster the mission.
Yeah. Very valuable.
Yeah, it just allows you to do your best work. And
I think another thing that probably isn't known as much is that I have always been Don's ears. I have a natural affinity for hearing and understanding music.
Yeah.
I did a lot of singing in high school, and I did some instrumental music in elementary school. However,
But was it that, or was it or is it a particular taste? Because let's say you didn't have any of that training. Do you still just hear it and go, no, not that, that?
I don't know, but I know that like on his albums, I've been able to come in and listen with fresh ears when he's presenting what he's presenting and give him ideas and say, you really should try this or whatever. So, he'll get very immersed in a process of recording, and the same with his live performances. I can hear the mix. I know the balances. I'm his ears as well as his organizer, so to speak.
Yeah.
So, I can talk to the sound people and let them know exactly where we need to be.
Well, that's also clear because I felt like in the organization process, I was also getting vetted.
Okay.
I felt like that. I felt like, oh, this is how this works, And when there's a operation firing on all cylinders, there are functions being taken care of.
Yeah.
And that a particular thing that takes care of a function doesn't have to worry about the other function not happening. So that was a contribution that I also was along the way absolutely felt. And I don't mean that in any sort of like I was being hurted or whatever, but
John, I just want to say this is probably a godsend that you are interviewing. You're probably the first person that has interviewed us and has drawn this parallel about this is not just about one person, when you know that there are other people who are very important to that process. And
I got a pretty good wife too.
well, you understand.
I know where my bread is buttered.
Yeah, but it's very meaningful. It's very insightful on your part to bring her in on this because
well, thank you.
Because she is my ears and she makes my life a lot better.
And he's so nice. Sometimes he lets me actually give him creative ideas, and he'll listen to them and use some of them. And sometimes they don't work for him. But Don has a favorite expression: behind every successful man, there's a woman telling him he's wrong.
That's why that's why he's successful.
That's right. Well, I know that, Julie, you have to get going. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to hit this pause button so that we can get you out of here. And then Don and I are just going to button this thing up.
I think about some of the things I've learned in reading and going to lectures. And one of them comes out is about how the universe was created. And we're trying to grapple with that. The scientists are grappling with that. And they come down to, on the quantum level, the string theory.
Okay.
And the string theory is, this is smaller than the nucleus. It makes up all these other things, and all it is a wiggle. It's a wiggle.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now just take that elementary wiggle right there. Why is music such a phenomenon to us?
Mm-hmm. Such a force.
Yeah. What is it? Because we're all made up of vibrations.
Yes.
Everything. Even the table that I'm looking at here.
It seems static.
Yeah, it seems, but it is a it's just in a different state. There's just different zeros and ones making it up. Okay,
Yeah.
And then I thought about, okay, when we come into this world, we sing 2 songs before we could say mom and pop. And what's the first song? First song is one of crying.
Uh-huh.
The second song is one of laughter. We do both.
Without any influence,
Yeah.
but
So when someone tells you they can't sing, or
well, they laughed and they cried and they vibrated before anybody had anything to do with it.
Yes, you did sing. You do sing.
Right.
It's a matter of whether or not it's cultivated, promoted in some way,
Or suppressed.
Or suppressed.
Because I can't sing is the language of somebody else saying, man, you can't sing.
And when you tell somebody they can't sing, you might as well tell them they don't exist.
Wow.
I've seen this happen. When I was going to high school. In our high school, every senior class had to sing at its baccalaureate and its commencement.
Every class.
Every class. And that senior year, you went once a week to choral. And Francois, who I mentioned earlier, he would make you sing. If you couldn't sing, he would make you sing.
I love this guy.
He would look at you to the point where you better sing or
Yeah.
And
there's just no choice.
You have no choice.
You're singing.
You're singing. And when this phenomenon happens, this lets people know that you exist. People exist. And it's because they're able to make a vibration. Now, you could be mute, but there's still something you can do. That vibration may be in dance, or maybe in your body movement, or whatever the case might be.
Right.
But you are singing one way or the other. It's the same phenomena. You're getting that connection, communicating.
Yeah. Creating an expression to be absorbed by somebody.
Yes.
And so that it moves them.
And so when we have a situation where the arts are suppressed or sometimes looked at as being the first expendable thing in an educational system.
What are we saying?
What are we saying? Okay, so years ago, maybe 25 years ago, 20 years ago, here in Pleasanton, our school system was grappling with the fact that they had to come up with finances for a state mandate of class size reduction. And we had just a middle school who just come online, Pleasanton Middle School, who had 300 students in a music class, one teacher, and another 100 who were on the waiting list to be in music. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
But that broke the rules. You couldn't have 300 students and one teacher.
Well, yeah, but in music you can't. You can have 1,000 people.
Right. We know that.
Yes. So, but what we were trying to say, I was saying, is that why are these kids on a waiting list? We need, if there's a desire there, that we should be able to fulfill it. So I went down to the board, and I said to the board, I had done research when I was with Yamaha on how academics are affected by the involvement of the arts. And the SAT scores actually reflected how much the kid was getting in the arts, how much they were being cultivated and influenced. And I walked in there, and I said the first thing to this board, I said, you know, the evidence is in. The universe is a living, interactive art form. And they wrote back, wow. What's this all about?
The evidence is in.
The evidence is in. The universe is a living, interactive art form. I said, mathematics.
That is an undeniable statement.
Yes. Mathematics and science are two of the systems that we have devised to try to
To
understand
make
it,
sense of it.
make sense of the
Yeah.
art form. So why would you bypass the study of the arts?
Oh, man.
Okay, that's fundamental.
Yeah.
Okay, so
But
what-
I want to punctuate for our listeners
Yeah.
because they're not all from Pleasanton, California.
Right.
And the thing about Pleasanton, it is known far and wide for having a tremendous school system.
yes,
And it's idyllic, and it's an idyllic community. It's beautiful here. I have very dear friends who I'm going to shout out. Peter Crosby, chief among them. But I've made friends with Peter Crosby's friends: Mike Stewart, Matt Ferris, Chris Brown, Don Berenger, Bob DeCarly, Gary Otley. I mention these people, James Bladen. I mention these people because our common thread is music.
oh wow,
And the artistic expression that you describe was what tied us together and what ties us together now. I met these guys when we were all in our early 20s, and we're dear friends now. Why? Because of this expression of music that was cultivated with them here in Pleasanton.
oh my gosh,
This is an important thing that you're saying, not just conceptually, but I have very dear friends for whom this is our common language, and they learned it here. I was lucky enough to learn a language close enough that I could join this group of friends.
Okay.
But this is the importance of music in life and here in Pleasanton.
okay.
So I wanted to just shout out my friends. So
This is great.
yeah.
Well, I tell you, I was down there for what you call public input on that first visit to the board. I came back a month later, and the board did this. They added a teacher to Pleasanton Middle School, another music teacher.
I see.
So that
To offset, just to satisfy the rule and to make it so that
all those kids who wanted to take music could take it. And then a few months later, they implemented or reinstituted the strings program that had been defunct for about
a
15
strings program.
Yeah, it used to be in the elementary school.
Yeah.
They stopped it many years ago.
Right.
And then they brought it forth.
Yeah.
About 5 years ago, the superintendent, Parveen Ahmadi, invited me to Julie and I to come and listen to a strings concert.
Wow.
There were 1,000 kids playing in the multipurpose room. 1,000 strings.
Wow. I thought you were going to say there were 1,000 parents in attendance.
No,
There were 1,000 kids
there were more people in.
expressing on the strings.
Yes, they had them in different groups and so forth,
Yeah.
and then they all played together.
Right.
But I got to tell you, when I
This is a bunch of kids beginning to understand how a society works.
Yes. I don't know if those kids understood the process that Pleasanton school system went through.
Right.
To make this happen, but it had to be because people heard an insight that gave them the volition
Yeah.
and the motivation to make sure that these kids had an artistic way to understand all of these things that they were learning otherwise. Because everything else, I said, if you looked at the curriculum in school, I said, if that holds truth, what I was talking about, the universe being
Yes.
the ultimate
An acting,
Yes.
living.
So if you looked at that as being the center,
Uh-huh.
then everything else that we're studying is about that center.
Right.
So mathematics is looking at
Relates
that
to
center.
it.
Science is relating to that. History is relating to
Yeah.
that.
Literature, everything makes sense of it.
Yes, and it's the art of the universe.
Yeah.
The art, because that's what it is. It's a creation. We're still trying to figure it out.
Yeah. And we will spend lifetimes
Yes.
and fulfilling lifetimes.
So that to me was the importance of showing the relationship and how it's not an ancillary part of our lives. I remember going to auditing a class by C.K. Lizeppo at Berkeley. He is from Ghana, and he was teaching African polyrhythms.
Oh boy.
Okay, and so I walked in there. There must have been about 150 kids in this auditorium. And across the stage, he had all these drums and so forth. And so we clap out all the different rudiments of the polyrhythms. And then when we got that all together, we come up on the stage, and he would be the lead drummer, and we'd be drumming behind him. And so we had a pause, and someone asked a question, said, Professor Lizeppo, what is the word for music in your native tongue? And there was this pregnant pause. It must have been 15 seconds. And I could see the kids getting anxious. What's taking on? Why is it taking so long? He says, we don't have a word for music in my native tongue. He says, unlike Western civilization, music's not a separate part of life.
Wow.
When he said that, the light went on in my head. I said, now I understand why we have such disregard. Because it's been ancillary.
We've compartmentalized it.
Yes. And he went on to say, he says, music goes with everything. He says, breathing, eating, and music and dance. He says, that's my culture.
Life.
That's life.
Yeah.
That's life. And when he said that, it just put everything in perspective for me about the importance of us understanding the meaning and why we need to do that. Whether you're a mathematician, whether you're an accountant, a lawyer, all of these things have to do with creativity. If it's about a course, a discourse of talking and debating, that's an art factor. I mean, all of this is about timing. It's okay, and what music is about timing. It's about vibrations over
fitting your vibration into.
Yeah, in periods.
Yeah.
And that's what history is about.
That's right.
We're recounting something.
Yes, so we can make sense of how it all came together.
Yes. So I'm excited. I keep thinking that this message will get out to all of us, and it's not how much money we have to spend, but it is how many lives will we bring back to their original innate nature. It's not like having a factory that turns out the same product, because people don't come here as that.
Yeah.
He come here as individualized as the design on a snowflake, and there are never two snowflakes that same design on it.
Yeah,
and that's what we
and
are.
all we ever really do is water down the purity.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is why the contributions of Don Lewis have been so important, because he is a catalyst for the unlocking of something in all of us that allows us to create, to vibrate higher, and to understand the world in a way that fulfills us and gives us the means to communicate. So I'm going to close this up by saying, Don, I love your work. I love you. This has been such a tremendous experience for me, just getting to know you. This is the first of many, many conversations that we will have about the profundity of how we vibrate and how we vibrate all together.
Thank you, John. This has been a pleasure for me to have you here in my home and to have this discourse, which rarely do I get a chance to do this.
You wait.
Because I think people need to understand that they are worth more than what sometimes they think they are. because we come here as individuals. We come here as co-creators.
That's right. In the ultimate collaboration.
Yes, co-creators.
Don Lewis, everybody.
Oh, hey, John, thank you.